We're going to talk a bit more about this now with our international affairs editor, Kethevin Gorgistani. Kethevin, lots of reports coming out of Egypt at the moment. Is a clearer picture beginning to emerge of where exactly we are?
Well, it's not clear yet, but there are good signs. One of those signs was the presence, as we saw in this report, of Ismail Haniyeh in Egypt. Because remember, last time the leader of Hamas actually traveled to Egypt, and he usually only travels when things are starting to possibly unfold, it was right before the announcement of that week-long truce. So that is seen by some as possibly a reason to be hopeful. And you had also in recent days those meetings between the Israelis, the Americans, the Qataris, who were also involved in that first truce. Then there's the added pressure on the Israeli government recently from the families of the remaining hostages, especially after the killing of 3 hostages by the IDF, those families really pressing Benjamin Netanyahu to get a deal done to make sure that these hostages come out. So there are intense negotiations. There are good signs. That said, there's still a lot of disagreement between Hamas and Israel. Hamas says that it wants a ceasefire in order to release the hostages. Israel says no ceasefire until the hostages are released. So that is a pretty big difference there. And then there's the debate as to if there is a deal, who does Hamas release? Women, elderly men, soldiers, and who does Israel release among the prisoners? Usually Hamas asks for more Palestinians to be released from prisons when you're talking about possibly Israeli soldiers. So we'll have to see if that can be worked out too.
Now, all this is coming as the UN Security Council has delayed a vote again for a third time on a new resolution about getting desperately needed aid into Gaza. Is there any hope that this time around the U.S. might support that instead of vetoing?
It's kind of a similar situation. Intense negotiations, good signs, but still no deal just yet. Really, the focus, as you said, is the United States. How do the rest of the countries get the United States on board, or at least get them to simply abstain and not veto? Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, has been in talks. It's not just the UN negotiators. He's involved. He's spoken to his counterparts in Egypt, in the UAE. He also had a common call with the foreign ministers of France, Germany, and the UK to discuss this. Some glimmer of hope and optimism coming from the UAE UN ambassador, saying that giving a little bit of space for additional diplomacy could yield positive results, meaning this is why we've tried to delay this vote, because we think we can get somewhere, though she did seem to hint that today might be the sort of deadline if they can't agree on a deal. What are we talking about? Semantics again. Urgent, sustainable cessation of hostilities. That was in the initial draft. The Americans see this as a ceasefire, basically, which they oppose. They're talking now about urgent suspension of hostilities, which could get the U.S. on board. But there are 2 other elements. One is the aid monitoring system, about who checks those trucks coming into Gaza. Right now, it's Israel. The Security Council wants the UN to be in charge of that. And then the Americans believe that there are 2 things missing from these resolutions: a condemnation of the October 7th attack by Hamas, and the mention of Israel's right to defend itself. Those are the things that they're discussing. We'll see later on today if they manage to have an agreement.
All right, Kethevin, thank you for that. France 24's Kethevin Gorgistani.